Great. Well, obviously, I'll begin with a formal introduction again. Boys, thank you for jumping on. I know there's a couple of parents in there as well, so really appreciate you giving up your time on a Friday evening, 2 consecutive Fridays in a row as well. So hopefully this evening is a little better or more entertaining than last week's presentation on the AIMS platform. Obviously, more of the software that we're using for injury prevention and protocols. But this evening is all about mental skills performance and how it relates to the performance and development of yourselves and in your career as young athletes. This evening we have a guest speaker by the name of Dr. Derek Mann. He is a performance coach who specializes in human performance as it pertains especially to mental skills, as well as the emotional side of honing some of those mental attributes and the psychology around high performance. Dr. Mann, he's a distinguished and expert in North America. He received his PhD in human performance from the University of Florida. And he's currently working as a consultant within his own firm as managing partner. He works with professional athletes, military personnel, as well as corporate executive. So he has an unbelievable background and expertise and in this field. And hopefully tonight he's going to give you guys some real tangible action items to take into your own developmental process. As obviously we have tonight probably ranging from 11 years old with some of the faces that I see here tonight, all the way up into the U19s who are preparing themselves for going on to college. So hopefully the information is applicable to your own situation. And if you do have any questions throughout the evening, please let us know. Dr. Mann, without further ado, I'll be quiet now and let you do your thing.
Oh, well, thank you, Jack. I appreciate the kind introduction. And Tommy, thank you for having me. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And for everybody that's in the audience, again, to echo Jack's comment, thanks for being here on a Friday night at 7 o'clock. And it sounds like some of you are traveling to South Florida, getting ready to play. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your travels to listen. So please do travel safely. And moms and dads that may be on the call, thank you for your support of your players. And if at any point through this conversation tonight, if you have comments, thoughts, questions, please don't hesitate to ask. To just kind of summarize a little bit of what Jack had mentioned, the goal tonight is obviously not to have a comprehensive conversation about all of what mental skills are and what they can all be and all encompassing, but really to talk about a couple of really critical elements and some things that I know Jack has been really trying to implement within the academy and supporting some of that message around mindset and how important mindset is. But also to piggyback off of that, we're going to talk a little bit about what some of the basic mental skills are that you as athletes can start to develop to help support your own personal development and growth. And most importantly, that if you can start to implement these with some guidance and some practice, you should likely start to see a translation of enhanced performance. And we'll talk a little bit about how this gets connected and why this is so important. So with that being said, we'll just jump right in with both feet. And as Jack mentioned, if any of the athletes here have thoughts, comments, questions, feel free to jump in. I'd love to engage in some dialogue. For me, this is a ton of fun, but I want to make sure that you get something tangible out of this. So you walk away and you feel like you've invested in this hour and not just spent some time here. So with that being said, let's just jump in. So Jack had asked me to sort of kick this off with, just a brief introduction to sports psychology. I'm sure most of you on some level have heard of the field, or at least heard of somebody who is maybe working with a quote unquote mental coach or a sports psychologist. If you flip on ESPN at any point these days, oftentimes, especially, certain sports like golf, baseball, we're starting to see more of it come up in football, both American football and soccer as we talk about it. The idea here is having a coach that can help develop and support the mental emotional skills that athletes need in order to be their very best. So that being said, the question is, so what is sports psychology? Well, in essence, sports psychology is sort of a complex field that, boiled down to its crux, is really about looking at human behavior and what are the factors that influence human behavior, especially under stress and pressure, et cetera. And so with that being said, if there's a takeaway for you to think about what sports psychology is and how it affects you as a developing athlete, as an aspiring athlete, and somebody who really wants to maximize their skills and abilities, think about it this way. What we think about, so if you imagine, if you can see the screen that's up, you can see the brain. So what we think about influences how we feel. And, certainly as young men, we don't often like to talk about feelings or emotions, but it's important for us to start to recognize this. And this is not a soft skill. This is recognizing what we're feeling or what we're experiencing, the emotions that we're experiencing is really fundamentally critical, because what we think influences what we feel, and what we feel influences how we act, or in this case, how we behave or perform. So in essence, when we talk about the relationship between thoughts, feelings, and actions, what we're really talking about is how much can we attend to, or what are we attending to in any given moment? How are our feelings or emotions driving that attention? But how also are those thoughts and feelings influencing our motivation, the pursuit of something that's important to us? And the real benefit to understanding all of this is that if we have a healthy relationship with understanding how our thoughts influence our feelings, then we can harness that to maximize our performance on the field when it matters most. And then taking a step back from that, which I'm sure coaches would love to hear, it's how then we can maximize our performance in training so we can build all of the technical, tactical, and physical skills, take full advantage of those technical, tactical, and physical skills when it matters most, game days. And that's really where the role of sports psychology comes in. And are there any thoughts, comments, questions on that right out of the gate as we sort of move forward here?
So, Dr. Mann, you mentioned about thinking, feeling, and performance. What could be some examples of thinking, feeling, and performing in a positive, but also on the contrary, maybe a not so positive example?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Thanks, Jack. So think about it this way. Let's say we have a game tomorrow and we're absolutely excited to get on the pitch, right? We've had a great week of training. We're thinking about the successes we're going to have. We're thinking about potentially, implementing a new skill or a new technique that we've been working on, a new touch. Maybe there's even a new offensive formation, a scheme that we're looking at implementing. We're excited about that. So our thoughts, those optimistic thoughts, those constructive thoughts, those thoughts of, being actionable, lead to an emotional set of excitement, of anticipation. So then arguably when we get to the game, when we get on the pitch, those optimistic emotions, those positive emotions, that excitement that we're feeling ultimately allows our attentional set, so what our brain is processing in the environment around us, to flex, to be broad and narrow most optimally, so we can adjust to what our opponents are doing, we can adjust to what our teammates are doing, and then we can perform at a high level. So there's a nice example of positive thoughts leading to positive emotions translating to really approach-oriented, excited actions on the pitch. On the flip side, let's say we had a really difficult week of training. We didn't have a lot of energy. Let's say, arguably, we got a lot of negative feedback from coaches. Our touch didn't feel good. So we're not super confident going into the match tomorrow. So now our thoughts are maybe thoughts of worry, thoughts of doubt. We're questioning our ability. So now what kind of feelings might we start to experience? We might start to feel nervous. We might start to feel heavy. We might even experience some anxiousness or even fear of failing, fear of not performing well. And so how does that translate onto the field? Well, oftentimes when we have this combination of thoughts and feelings, it translates into us being tight or potentially lethargic, meaning not having a lot of energy as we or at least the enough energy that we need to experience to be our very best. So now we get on the field, our touch isn't very good. We notice that our breathing is a little tougher or harder than it might normally be because we're not optimal. So then the real question is, we know that those scenarios exist, and I'm sure every athlete on the call in one way, shape, or form has experienced both of those scenarios to some extent. But the real challenge is when we're in that latter experience, we haven't had a good week of training. Our thoughts aren't particularly positive or constructive. We're not feeling great about what we're about to do. And maybe the match starts and it's not starting very effectively. We're not a good version of ourselves. Can we figure out how to flip the switch? That's where sports psychology comes in. One, we want to be able to increase the probability that we're going to be in that optimal set before the game ever starts. But should we ever get in a situation where we're not there, do we have the skills, the resilience and the perseverance to be able to flip the switch, become the best version of ourselves, and then go out and have a successful end to that competition? It doesn't always mean a win, but it's meaning being the best version of yourself in those moments that matter most. Does that help to answer that question, Jack?
Yes, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I think that's in essence what I've spent the last, about 25 years studying and practicing and helping athletes, develop these skills through coaching, et cetera. So with that being said, let me share with you, if you will, what I refer to as my pathways to performance. And this, in most ways, really resembles how I like to coach, starting with mindset. And I'm going to walk you through this. But not only is this a framework for my coaching and working with athletes and or teams, but it's also a model, a framework that any individual athlete can really come in and pick up and ask the question, where am I on this ladder of skills? Am I aware of my mindset? Am I self-aware of my strengths and weaknesses, et cetera? And then interject and be intentional and deliberate about taking steps to getting better in any one of these areas. And we'll talk about what this looks like. And then ultimately, as we round out tonight, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the mental skills, the things specifically that we can work on developing that will translate into higher levels of success. So if you'll entertain me for a minute, well, what I'd love to start with is this idea of mindset, right? And so people might always ask me the question, well, why wouldn't you start with self-awareness rather than mindset? And what is mindset? Well, we're going to dig into mindset a little bit more in a second, but just to give you a high-level perspective of what this is, mindset really is, how we see the world around us. In essence, it's our own sets of values, attitudes, and beliefs that we have that influence how we see, in this case, as athletes, how we see training. Whether it's, getting in the strength into the weight room. What's our perception of that? How do we see practice? How do we see film sessions? How do we view competition? So as an example, and we're going to dig into this a little bit more in a minute as well, is the idea of talent versus effort. Maximum talent, being born with an ability versus maximizing our ability through hard work. That's a mindset. That's a belief. And I'll give you a deeper example of that. But starting with understanding an athlete's mindset gives me a really clear idea of how they're going to generally start to perceive successes and or failures. It's going to give some insight into how they see training and preparation rather than just competition and outcome. And so it's a really insightful way to start. Then the second step in this process is really about understanding self-awareness or creating self-awareness for the athlete. So I ask all of you that are listening, are you crystal clear on what your strengths are as an athlete? And so we can start with thinking about just your technical strengths. So what are you good at? What about your physical strengths? What are your strengths? Do you have maximum power? Are you a speed athlete? Can you just run all day long? What do those strengths look like? And then equally, are you aware of what your weaknesses are? And we're at a time now, I find in development across the board, but in sport as well, where we really want to hone in on our strengths and sometimes put blinders on to our own weaknesses. But I challenge you to take a hard look in the mirror as young athletes and really ask yourself, if I have to hang my hat on a set of skills, what am I really good at? And if I really want to get to the next level and achieve my dreams, whether it's playing, elite level high school soccer, if I want to get to the collegiate level, or if I'm looking to make it to the professional ranks, take a hard look at that and ask yourself, what are the things that I need to develop in order to close that gap to be the best version of myself? That's where self-awareness comes in. So really understanding your own character, your physical skills, your technical skills, your tactical skills, and then equally, as we're talking about tonight, your mental and emotional skills. Then to me, it takes us to the next level. This begs the question, and this is directed for everybody here listening. Why do you do what you do? That's what drive is. Otherwise said, your motivation. Why do you play the game? Some of us play the game because we want to get a scholarship, because we want college or university to be paid for. That's why we play. Some of us play the game because it's the most enjoyable, fun, engaging thing that we can ever do in our day. So we just love to get on the pitch and play. Some of us love to play the game because there's natural relationships that are formed and we can build bonds with 15, 16 other guys on our team. So, but understanding why we do what we do is a really critical piece. And the reason I bring this up is because, as you know, any level of sport comes with not only great success, but challenges and setbacks and failures. And the big question is, how are we going to handle those setbacks and failures? So when we talk about motivation is going to help us, really transition through some of those difficult times. It's going to allow us to be not only resilient, where we can bounce back from setbacks, but it's also going to allow us to persevere, push in the face of some resistance. So for example, if I'm a really high level competitor and I come across a great team and they're doing everything in their power to prevent us from being the best that we can be, can I find a way to persevere? Or am I going to see this team is just better than us and I'm going to take my foot off the gas and am I going to concede? Right? So mindset, self-awareness influences motivation. And so we have to know who we are and why we do what we do. So those are the first three things. Then to me, the next step, and coaches love to talk about this concept of mental toughness. And really, this is the next one for me, because mental toughness is about having a foundation of self-worth and self-belief, otherwise said confidence. If I'm going to have that resolve that we're talking about and that persistence and resilience, I need to have an inner belief that I can actually accomplish these things. And that's where mental toughness comes in. And so we'll talk a lot about where your confidence is, how you derive confidence, what are some of the factors that are under your control in order to build and develop your own confidence. Because this to me is, and I think most of the athletes on the call can relate to this, is that, hey, when things are just naturally going well, I walk tall, I talk confidently, I've got a little pep in my step, right? And we just naturally feel confident. But the question really becomes, and this is a differentiator between good and great athletes, is do I have the resolve and the deep-rooted belief in myself despite not having great success all the time? So in other words, if I'm in a bit of a slump, if I'm having a couple of bad games, do I have the inner belief that I can change the course of those outcomes, change the course of my destination, as opposed to just waiting for something good to happen to me? And there's a big difference there. And that's where mental toughness comes in. So you see that the first four steps, as I talk about, are really about understanding you, the athlete, and helping you, the athlete, understand yourself on a higher level. That's my role, is to help create awareness for you. The next step in this is now sort of the empowerment piece. And this is about teaching some of the mental skills that will help you maintain confidence under stress and pressure, to help you better maximize that inner motivation that you have, and supporting that self-awareness. And then if in some cases our mindset initially isn't optimal, but through using optimal mental skills, we can move the needle. We can shift your mindset a little bit through coaching and self-awareness to get you to think about competition, challenge, and setback and success in the right way. Then you could be the best version of yourself. So that's where the mental skills come in. And then lastly, and this is something I would love to challenge all of you to think about right now, is this idea of commitment. So a lot of times we think of commitment in sort of a negative way, right? Like I'm giving up something. I want you to think about commitment in as sort of an investment, right? I'm investing my time and energy into something that's important to me. So if soccer is a real passion of yours, are you investing in yourself every time you're at practice? Are you investing in yourself when it's time to watch video? Are you investing in your time, in your recovery, in eating well, maintaining nutrition and hydration and those kinds of things? And the reason I bring this up is, and I'm going to challenge you to think about this a little bit on your own, and maybe even, Jack, maybe encouraging some of these conversations to occur within the team. But that is, how do you as individual athletes define high performance? What does that look like for you? Okay. So really think about that. And obviously I'm not going to put anybody on the spot here right now, but I really want to challenge you to think about, how do you define high performance? Now, then the question becomes, whatever definition you come up with, whatever that standard is for yourself, ask yourself this question: do you have the habits, the daily habits, to allow you to live that high performance lifestyle, to achieve the standard that you're talking about? And that is ultimately where the rubber meets the road for me. So with all the work that we do, what we ultimately have to do is create the mental skills and refine those mental skills that will support your mindset, your self-awareness, your motivation, etc. But then translating it and moving it forward to helping now you creating the habits, the daily habits of success that will lead to the high performance that you've identified, which should align to the long-term goals that you're setting for yourself. Now, for some of the younger athletes in the room, you might be looking at me saying, oh boy, what is he talking about? Long-term success, all those kinds of things. And it might be something as simple as, making the MLS 1 team. That might be the next step in your natural progress. If you're currently on the MLS 2 team, if you're not on either, maybe the next progression is getting to MLS 2. If you're on MLS 1, is it, hopefully signing a professional contract or getting picked up by a top Division 1 program somewhere. So you're advancing, having the vision, and then asking yourself, are my daily habits and actions, attitudes and beliefs aligned with what I'm trying to accomplish? That's what commitment is. You're investing in yourself to make it to that next level. So thoughts, comments, questions there. I know I just threw a whole lot of stuff at you. Jack, Tommy, anything that maybe you'd like to clarify or to dig into a little bit more?
No, this is great. I'm actually really happy, and as I'm looking through the ranks, some of the players that are actually taking notes, which is fantastic.
Oh, great.
Nothing to add.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And fellas as well, for all the players on the call, if anybody has a question, you want to fire it into the chat, or if you feel so confident to jump on and want to ask, feel free to do so. I would love to engage. But Jack, how about for you? Any thoughts, comments?
Nothing for me. I think one of the things that popped out in my mind was looking at it on a obviously if you're building a foundation for when things also don't go too well. So I think that's probably one thing that maybe a lot of the boys are resonating after. I think the majority of the people on the call probably had their PDPs and their evaluations with their respective coaches over the last couple of weeks. So having that idea when things aren't going too well, or you do receive maybe some feedback that you didn't expect, whether that was negative or constructive criticism, is now having all of those skills built up, and you're developing them over time, so you can deal with them well, and obviously take them as a platform to grow, rather than shy away from those things that we want to achieve on like you said, a long-term basis, because that's our goal as coaches, is obviously creating players for the long term, not just the short-term success for the weekend's games, but balancing both.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think having those types of meetings can be very inspiring and encouraging and motivating for some athletes, regardless of whether the feedback is positive or constructive. On the flip side, those meetings can be scary, overwhelming, discouraging, deflating, even for some other athletes. And for me, the question always becomes why? Why one versus the other, right? And in essence, this comes back down to the foundational piece of mindset. So let's take a little leap forward here, because this often is foundationally an important question. So I'm going to just throw this out there just for a minute to think about. I know we don't necessarily have the means for a full-on engaged conversation here, but think about this question. What is more important for you, talent or hard work? Just think about, just in an instant, as I mentioned, talent or hard work, which one resonated with you? Would you rather be talented or hardworking? Just give that a thought for a second. So I'm sure we're probably pretty close to split on this. And in my experience with working, especially with younger athletes, oftentimes the idea of talent becomes most prevalent, right? And then the question becomes why? Why do we value talent? Well, if I'm talented, that must mean I'm good, right? And I think some of you could probably resonate with that. We have a natural ability to just have that soft touch, or we have great possession, or we're naturally fast or naturally strong. All of that is great. But does raw talent amount to or guarantee success? Well, the answer to that, unfortunately, is no, right? And so here I have arguably two of the greatest players on the planet currently walking, breathing, living, playing as we speak. We have Neymar on the left. We have Cristiano on the right. Right. And so why did I put these guys up here? Because it's a hard argument to make that one is heads and tails better than the other. Right. I think there's people, and Jack, I might put you on the spot here a little bit. If I had, or maybe Tommy, if I could throw you on the spot here a little bit as well. You know, if I were to pit the two of you against one another, who would you side with? Neymar or Ronaldo? Who's better?
I'd go with Ronaldo.
Okay, Jack?
I'll follow the boss's answer before I get fired. So yeah, I'd go Ronaldo.
Safe bet. I get it. But okay, so now why would we say that?
I'd say for me, and I think it's players that identify in themselves that the growth potential, you know. I think that's something that players have to do first before they're even able to adapt, learn, be in a high performance environment to be able to be successful, if that makes sense. So if a player is just talented but doesn't want to put forth the work, then it's twice as hard to work with that player and have the player accomplish the goals that the player sets forth for himself.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Jack, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think for me, when I'm looking at the two players on screen as well, I'm looking at the potential that Neymar could have fulfilled if he and I think we all know as fans, sometimes he's leaving a few things in the tank, you know, as I'd say to a lot of my boys, you know, when you look at Ronaldo on the right hand side, he's leaving everything on the pitch and he's fulfilling his potential, and no matter where he's gone, he's obviously adapted to the environment, and naturally, as you know, there's a lot of challenges that come with that. So I would go with Ronaldo, because not only has he adapted and continues to, like we say, leave it all out there, but he's also that team player that we value highly. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that as well. And I love both perspectives, right? And I think both of you are alluding to something that we're going to touch on around mindset, and that's called the growth mindset. But here's why I think this is such an important conversation to have. So arguably, as I mentioned earlier, both are performing at the highest level in the world stage, representing their respective teams, their countries, and doing a fine job with it. But if you look at the narrative around the world, if you look at the narrative around Neymar, everybody would say, and I think, Jack, you just touched on this, he's leaving something on the table. In terms of his professionalism, he's not really attention to detail, doesn't necessarily dot his I's, cross his T's. His work ethic isn't necessarily that hard, or that high rather. And one of the things that we see is, on the international stage at least, is perhaps a less consistent player over an extended period of time. On the flip side, if we look at someone like Ronaldo, who is arguably considered to be one of the hardest working players, hands down, is also one of the most consistent on the international stage. He's been the most consistent for a long period of time as well. And so one point that I want to make here is that the way we choose to view talent versus hard work ultimately influences what we pay attention to. It influences how we spend our time or invest our time. It also influences how we perform across time and in big moments under pressure. And so there's a number of things to consider. And I will leave you with this thought on this, is that it doesn't matter how much talent we have. If we don't work as hard as we possibly can, we'll never maximize that potential. And I think that's the greatest message. So ask yourself, there are players like a Neymar, and by saying this as well, please note that I mean no disrespect to him as a player or as a human being or his ability. He's obviously one of the greatest players on the planet. But the question becomes, how good could he be if he was fully invested and fully dedicated to his craft? Some athletes, and there's a rare few in the planet we've seen, Dennis Rodmans of the world, the Neymars of the world, et cetera, that just are able to perform at this high level with lots of other distractions. So if you're not one of those highly gifted individuals, and yet you cut corners in your training and your preparation, are you ever able to fully realize or maximize your potential? The answer is almost always going to be no. When we see examples like a Ronaldo, who's the hardest worker on the planet, it's likely that he's maximizing his potential because of his hard work. And this is the recipe for success. And so the one thing that I really want to drive home here is that a lot of this comes down to our mindset, right? It's that established set of attitudes and beliefs. What does talent mean to me relative to hard work? If I have to work hard, that must mean I'm not very good. If I have lots of talent and I have to work hard, well, the potential there might be even scarier, right? Because now the ceiling is unlimited. So how many of you have heard, oh, you have so much potential as a young player? And does that inspire you? Or does that concern you? Does it worry you? Does it scare you? And for some athletes, the word potential is very frightening. For others, potential is very inspiring. That's a mindset. That's a belief. And so I want to just dig in on that a little bit more. So Carol Dweck, a Stanford psychologist, she came up with this concept of mindset and really two disparate mindsets. And this is an important thing to really consider. As I go through this, as young athletes, what I would like for you to do is just listen to the descriptions and the examples and see where you have a tendency to fit. Which side of the spectrum, whether it be a fixed mindset or a growth mindset, do you have a tendency to lean toward? This is not a judgment of good or bad, okay? We're going to talk about some of the, the tendencies that we all have, but this is about creating awareness. Because the one thing that Carol Dweck would argue, and I can certainly support this in my own work that I've done operating through this lens and this model, is that we can absolutely shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And if we're not careful, we can absolutely go the other direction from a growth mindset to a fixed mindset. And having some of those fixed mindset tendencies don't often work to our advantage, but we will talk about some scenarios where it might work. But so let's think about it this way. If we talk about these two mindsets, a fixed mindset basically suggests what I'm born with is what I have. My intelligence, my talent. If I have good speed as a young athlete, that's because I was born that way. I'm just naturally fast. And if I was born slow, well, I'm going to be slow my whole life. That's, again, a bit of an extreme example, but that's in essence where the fixed mindset would start. A growth mindset would look at intelligence or ability as nothing more than a starting point. Our innate intelligence or innate abilities, nothing more than a starting point that we can develop over time through intentional practice and deliberate practice, purposeful practice, all the types of things that you'd be going through on a regular basis with your coaches, right? And then obviously the more intentional or deliberate we are on our own, the more we can absolutely move the needle forward or increase or heighten the ceiling for our own ability and our own development. The fixed mindset would simply say, well, if I'm good, I'm good. And yes, I'll continue to get better over time. Naturally, as I age and grow and develop, my natural ability will emerge, where the growth mindset will say that exponentially I'm going to get better as a result of my invested hard work, my deliberate practice, and my concerted effort. Okay. But now here's where we start to dig in and see some things that are a little bit different between the two. The way we see challenges, obstacles, effort, feedback, and even the success of others is interpreted very differently between those with a fixed mindset versus those with a growth mindset. So ask yourself where you fall on these two continuums. So for example, an athlete with a fixed mindset has a tendency to really thrive and embrace situations where outcomes are a little bit more guaranteed, right? So if I know that I have a really high probability of winning this game, I generally go out, play really well. I'm loose, I'm free, I'm excited. Things are great. If I'm guaranteed to lose because the competition I'm playing is just so much better, I'm kind of free, I'm loose, I'm easygoing, I can go out and play. I know we're going to lose, but I just get after it. And sometimes I even make a really good game of it. The challenge for the fixed mindset is when we come across teams or individuals or athletes that are a very similar ability, similar talent level, similar physical skills and attributes, because now it's a real true test of who I am, right? And now if I'm not successful in this moment, in order for me to be successful, it requires a full effort, a full concerted me. If I'm not successful in that moment, then what does it say? It says, my talent isn't very good. My ability isn't very good. And that becomes a big threat to our ego. So it's hard for fixed mindset athletes at times to really take on those really big challenges, the ones that are most at risk, the 50-50 balls, the games where we just don't know how successful we can be. On the flip side, the growth mindset athlete, they actually love those environments because it's a true test. It's a true benchmark of where they stand, right? If they have a tendency to not be successful in that moment, it's not a big threat to their ego. In fact, because they're less focused on outcome and more focused on process, they can look at it a little easier and say, hey, what did I do well in today's game? What didn't I do very well? What could I continue to do and what might I do differently? Where the fixed mindset athlete might just simply look at it and say, man, we lost, this sucks, it hurts. And we don't necessarily, and it takes some time to step back and really evaluate our opportunities for growth and development. So that's one big difference between a fixed and a growth mindset, how they perceive challenge. Another is how they perceive obstacles. We talked earlier about that push, that perseverance. How hard am I going to battle against somebody that's resisting against me? If I'm in a 1v1 situation, am I okay with just giving 90% and saying, yeah, I tried my best, but I lost the battle? Or am I going to give everything I have and leave it all out there? Well, generally speaking, fixed mindset athletes have a tendency to give up a little easier, and they're not quite as resilient. It takes them a little longer to bounce back. Growth mindset athletes, they're able to persist longer, harder, bigger fight, bigger push. And if they fail, they have a tendency to bounce back a little quicker. And a lot of this comes around effort, right? A growth mindset athlete has no problem putting in maximal effort all the time. A fixed mindset athlete struggles with that at times because, again, if I have to work really hard all the time, it must tell me I'm not very good. And it's just a limited way of thinking about things. Okay. So the next piece is about feedback. And this comes back to Coach Jack's point, where many of you have gone through meetings with your respective coaches, been given feedback about things you're doing well, areas for growth and development, et cetera. How have you handled that? Fixed mindset athletes have a tendency at times to hear the message, but ultimately ignore implementation, especially around some of that constructive or even negative feedback, where the growth mindset athletes often hold on to that. They use that as motivation and really try to take their play to the next level based on the feedback that they're getting. And then lastly, another distinction that emerges here is how we interpret the success of others, and especially in our own team. Fixed mindset athletes, if they see a teammate who maybe is competing for the same position of them, thriving and doing well, they're threatened by that. And oftentimes they're uninspired. Their ego gets hurt, right, in some capacity. On the other side, the growth mindset athlete will look at this and say, wow, that guy's doing a great job. Let me pay attention to some of the things he's doing in order to be successful. And maybe I can model my own game after that. I can learn from my teammate. So they're going to see the success of others as oftentimes very inspiring, right? So now let's look at this. I painted two very polar opposite spectrums, and I would expect that none of us just sit on one and not on the other. We're good. There's a nice gradient here, and we're gonna waver back and forth. And sometimes it's context dependent. For some of us, it's a little bit more consistent across situations. For example, we might view challenges in school the same way we view a challenge on the soccer field as we view challenges, maybe in some other facet of our life. But here's the thing: wherever you feel like you sit right now, and if you have a tendency to recognize that you're a little bit more in the fixed mindset, don't look at this as, oh man, I'm doomed. No, that's not it at all. In fact, actually creating the awareness is the first step in this process. Recognizing how you view feedback, challenges, obstacles, etc. And if it's not optimal, we can work on shifting that mindset, creating more of a growth mindset. Now, if you're optimally growth mindseted, right? So you see all of the great things through, this very optimistic lens. Sometimes we might have to bring a little bit of ego back into the mix here, right? So we can find ways to challenge ourselves on new levels and compete at a higher level. Sometimes the great growth mindset athletes lack some of that competitiveness at times, right? Because they look at it and say, well, I'll learn from this and move forward. So we've got to find a little bit of the ego investment to get in there so we can be maximally competitive. But if we really want to talk about where the needle sits, we absolutely want to shift ourselves towards that growth mindset, embracing challenge, giving maximal effort, pushing through those barriers and obstacles, and not conceding to those challenges, hearing feedback and finding some way to take a message and applying it to your own growth and development. If you can do that, you will almost always come out on the winning side of the equation. It may not be immediate, but it'll come out on the winning side of the equation. And I think there is no better example of this than perhaps Michael Jordan, certainly in the popular media, right? Most of you, I would assume, know who Michael Jordan is arguably the greatest basketball player to ever walk the planet. And you can look at his trajectory and his story and argue that not only was he one of the greatest competitors, but he was also of the growth mindset. So look at this quote, for example, that is here. And it says, this is Michael Jordan coming out of his book. And he talks about, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. On 26 different occasions, I was entrusted to take the winning shot, but I missed. I failed over and over again. And that's ultimately how I succeeded, right? There's a lot to that. And I think if all of us just pause for a minute, even as young athletes, you're going to recognize you've had lots of failures. But the question is, are you learning from those setbacks? Are you learning from those failures so the next time the challenge comes along, you can be better in that moment? Or are you allowing it to undermine your confidence so the next time that situation arises, we have a tendency to shy from it? Or at the very least, we're not prepared to be the best version of ourselves in that moment. That's the big question. So I challenge you guys to think about this, because this is ultimately a choice. The choice is, we can view every situation as a challenge, not as a threat. We can view it as a challenge and go after it. We can view obstacles as nothing more than a test of our resolve, a test of our internal fortitude, that competitor in us. We can see that giving our best every day actually translates into a success, into a win, into a victory. And by getting feedback, we can be better. Here's an example with Michael Jordan. So for those of you who are not familiar, when Michael Jordan was in high school, as a sophomore, he tried out for the varsity team. And unfortunately, he didn't make the varsity team. He was reassigned to the JV team. And unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but the reality was that was actually pretty common. It was very rare for his coach to have more than one sophomore on the varsity team at that time anyway. But Jordan was reassigned to the JV team. He took that as a clear indication, based on the feedback he got from his coach, that he didn't have the necessary skills and abilities yet to play at that level. So what did he do? He went home that summer. And oh, by the way, he was also a really high level baseball player, pitcher and outfielder, and arguably getting recruited at that time to play Division I baseball. But he really had a passion to play basketball. And so when he was reassigned to the JV team, he looked at this and said, well, this is almost the ultimate challenge. How am I going to get better? How am I going to earn that spot next year? Well, and as you know, the rest is history. Not only did he make the varsity team, he went to North Carolina, won national championships, went on to the Chicago Bulls, and became one of the, if not the single greatest player in the history of the game. Oh, but however, let's pause on that for a second and reflect a little bit on Jordan's professional trajectory. When he first got into the league, he was considered to be a great defensive player and arguably one of the great offensive minds and scorers in the game. But his team was not very successful. And season after season, he was having tremendous individual success. But he really aspired to be a champion. And he thought what he really needed to do was find a way to get everybody on his back. He was going to be the hero, and he was going to take everybody to the promised land. And it didn't work. Year after year after year, it didn't work. Phil Jackson comes in and challenges him, right? So we talk about feedback, gave Michael some really tough criticism, some tough feedback, and said, you're not a good leader. You don't have buy-in from your teammates. You're selfish. You need to rethink how you're going to play the game. You need to not just be a scorer, but you need to learn how to distribute the ball. Oh, okay. So for a lot of professionals at that level, they might say, okay, coach, thanks. We'll see how long you last here, because, at the end of the day, I'm one of the best players in the league. So it's your job to figure out how to win. It's my job to score baskets, right? Well, Michael took that feedback to heart. And what did he do? He embraced a brand new leadership style. He not only learned how to challenge his teammates, he adapted his style of play. He distributed the ball more. He took less shots. He increased his proficiency. His scoring rate was at a much higher level. And ultimately what happened? The Chicago Bulls became a dynasty. And of course, it's not all on him. There were other pieces to the puzzle. But because he took that feedback, because he was willing to hear the criticism, because he saw the successes of others, the Magic Johnsons of the world at the time, the Kareem Abdul-Jabbars of the world at the time, and said, I want what they have. They inspire me to do great things. How can I change, grow, and be a better version of myself? And that's why he is arguably going to go down in history as the greatest basketball player to ever play. And so if I challenge you to think about wherever you are in your path and your level of progression right now, you've got to start to ask yourself, am I open to this kind of feedback? As a young player who wants to aspire to higher levels of performance, am I open to feedback? And that's ultimately the question. That's what the growth mindset is really all about. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Anybody from the audience? So a transition here in a second. All right, very good. So there's a couple questions that came up. Well, one, I have a question for you before I engage in a couple of questions that Jack shared with me from you all. And this question, I want you to think about how you would respond to this. So right before an important competition, my heart rate increases. I have butterflies in my stomach and even racing thoughts. for me, this is an indication that I feel A, really excited and ready to perform, maybe anxious and uncertain, maybe lacking some confidence, or, well, it kind of depends on who I'm competing against, how it makes me feel. I want you guys just to think about that a little bit, okay? Because at the end of the day, oftentimes, not only our mindset, but if you remember how we started this conversation, what we think influences what we feel, and what we feel influences how we perform or how we act. This is an important question to ask. So, as a quick example, if you think about the last time you were really excited about something, here we go. Hi there. If you think about the last time you were really excited about something, what did that feel like? Chances are, if you recall back, you probably noticed your heart rate started to increase. Your breathing or respiration rates probably started to go up a little bit, right? You may have even had a little bead of sweat on your forehead. You might have had some tingling sensations in your body and your muscles, and your mind might have started to wander a little bit, excited, racing thoughts. But now ask yourself the last time you were really nervous, anxious, or even afraid or fearful in a situation. What did you feel like? Well, you probably noticed your heart rate went up. You probably noticed you had some butterflies in your belly. Your mind started racing, your sweaty palms, maybe a bead of sweat on your forehead. So when we think about this, our body in many ways responds almost the same way to something that's excitement or fear-based, right? Because what's happening physiologically, meaning our body, our internal system combined with our brain are priming us to do something, to move. And it's to either approach the situation or potentially to avoid the situation. But now here's the big difference. It's how we choose to think about that situation that influences how we appraise what we're feeling. In other words, how we interpret what we're feeling. So if I think about my heart rate going up, butterflies in my stomach or a nervous stomach or beads of sweat on my forehead as, oh, this is my body's way of telling me, hey, this game is important to me. And yeah, I might be a little excited about it. Oh, that's going to influence now how I approach it, how I start to perform in that moment. Does that make sense to everybody? So thinking about that idea, we have the ability to choose how we think about what it is we're feeling and how those feelings influence how we act. Now, here's the underlying catalyst in all of this. There is no shortcut for preparation. Preparation is going to translate into confidence. There is no doubt about that. So, as we talk about this idea of maximal effort, persevering through challenge, having a growth mindset, and embracing those challenges, at the core, that's going to be foundational to building the confidence. So when you're in those big moments, you can interpret them as excitement and ready to perform rather than anxiousness and uncertainty. Okay. So ask yourself this question. When you're in training, are you the best version of yourself? I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm just asking you to think about, are you the best version of yourself day in and day out in training? If you can answer the question, yes, then you're building the foundation to be a confident, high-performing athlete. If the answer is no, you're ultimately cutting off your own growth and development at your knees. And when it matters, your confidence is going to wane because in the back of your mind, you know you haven't done all the work you need to in order to be the best version of yourself when it matters most. So there's no shortcut to building confidence. Athletes ask me all the time, I just don't feel like I'm very confident. Okay, well, let's talk about the last week of training. You trained for 5 days going into the game on Saturday. How many days of training were you the best version of yourself? You gave maximal effort with a good attitude. You heard feedback. You tried to apply it. 1 day. So 1 out of 5 days, you had the opportunity to actually get better. That means 4 out of those 5 days, you undermined your own confidence. Does that make sense? And that's an important lesson. So it may sound like I'm sort of preaching at you in this regard. I don't want it to come across that way. What I really want you to do is hear me challenging you to not go out and try to be perfect every day, but to go out with maximal effort, good attitude, try to learn and develop a new skill, put it on the line, be vulnerable in those moments so you can be the best version of yourself when it matters most. And so that that becomes an important point, because there were a couple of really great questions that came up here. And I know we're approaching 8 o'clock, so we don't have a ton of time, but I want to walk through these, just to give you some food for thought on a couple things where we sit here. So the first question, which I thought was a great question. So now I appreciate you asking this. After a bad session or a bad game, how should I deal with the frustration? It's a great question. So oftentimes, first and foremost, we have to ask ourselves, why do I feel frustrated? Why am I angry or maybe even sad? What's at the core of that? So let's think about this at a very high level. If I'm having this kind of reaction after a bad game or a bad training session, it's almost always because the goal that I have set got blocked, right? I didn't accomplish the goal that I wanted. So now you have to ask yourself, was the goal simply a win? Was the goal simply a pat in the back? Was the goal simply, being recognized by my coach or my mom or my dad or my teammates? Was it outcome based? Or is your goal process based, process oriented, meaning finding a way to get better through the day? So we have to ask ourselves that first and foremost. What goal did I have that got blocked? Okay. Now the question then becomes, how am I evaluating this? Am I judging it as a success or failure, good or bad? Well, that's going to ultimately reinforce some of the negative feelings we have. So if I really want to figure out how I can deal with that frustration, let's first and foremost do one thing. Let's move away from judgment. Judgment is really fixed in the growth mindset in the fixed mindset as we were talking about. Let's get more into a process. So I'm going to challenge you to do this. At the end of every training session, whether it's the best one you've ever had or the worst one you ever had or anything in between, I want you to develop this habit. I want you to start asking yourself these questions. What worked today? And what would I continue to do? Okay, so what worked today and what would I continue to do? What were the good things that if I continue to do these, I'm going to continue to have some successes? Then you can also ask yourself, what didn't work today? So what would I do differently, in other words, right? So that's 4 simple questions. What worked and what would I continue to do? What didn't work? What would I do differently? If we stay there, that creates a neutral mindset. It's free of judgment. It puts us into a growth perspective, and it allows us to objectively evaluate so we can process that information without our ego getting hurt or feeling sad or bad. And now we can simply apply a developmental approach to getting better. And that's really the key. So that's a great question. I hope now that helps to answer that question. And I'm happy to clarify if it wasn't particularly clear. But coaches, any thoughts on that? Was that reasonably clear?
Yeah, I think that was fantastic, Doc. And I think, as you mentioned, having that reflective process, because sometimes when we do go in and we reflect back on a game, whether it was a loss or a win even, and we're looking at it, but we're not also looking at maybe on those bad days. I'm sure that it wasn't all bad. So you're now looking at the things that you did do well, and you'd probably replicate again. But also on those days that do go well, sometimes that outcome can maybe take us away from some things that we can do better next time. And I think that's the thing that myself and Tommy continue to talk about, is that growth orientation. So it's not just good enough to win and rest on your laurels, as we would say, but now to use that as a springboard to the next game to keep on growing and become better.
Absolutely. And just to extend that point for the players listening to this, that doesn't mean don't celebrate your success. Absolutely embrace those successes. But even in our success moments, there's opportunities to learn, grow, and get better. And if we have a setback or a failure, that it shouldn't derail us. Don't let that become catastrophic. Just simply look at it as a learning opportunity. Our greatest growth moments should happen in the face of setback, should happen in the face of failure. And if it doesn't, then arguably we're destined to repeat those same mistakes over time. And so we want to think about how we can set ourselves up that way. So thank you, Jack, for sharing that. So for the sake of time, just moving on to the next 2 questions here. the next question from Mika is, how can I deal with stress before a game? So oftentimes athletes use stress and pressure interchangeably. And so I'm going to assume, Mika, in some capacity, you're also alluding to this idea of pressure, meaning that, it's a big moment, there's maybe high stakes associated with it. So the first thing I would challenge you to think about is, how are you viewing that game? Are you viewing the game as an opportunity to go out and gain something? Or are you viewing that game, competition, challenge as a potential threat to losing something, right? So for example, it's not uncommon, and I'm not suggesting any of our coaches here do this, because I know we would never do this. But some coaches, love to make the moment bigger than it is, right? So we're let's say at a championship game. Hey guys, come on. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. You'll never get this moment again, right? For some people, a small percentage, that can be really exciting. But for most of us, it's actually a bit overwhelming. It's a bit fear-provoking, right? And I'm sure some of you have been overwhelmed by that moment in and of itself. So what has happened? That's just a moment of somebody exaggerating the importance of the situation. And then ultimately what that does is build pressure. And so there's a couple things that we have to think about. What am I afraid of? Am I afraid of losing something? Am I afraid that my teammates or my parents or somebody's not going to like me or appreciate me or value me anymore? Am I afraid that I'm not going to be recognized for my effort if we lose? All of that basically suggests that there's a cost associated with that performance. So I challenge you to just reframe it. One, don't make the moment any bigger than it needs to be. All it is another game, another opportunity to go out to be the best version of yourself. So create a challenge mindset rather than a threat mindset. And here's the difference. A challenge is when I believe through my training and hard work that my technical and tactical and physical skills are all ready and primed to go out to meet the demands of that situation. So I'm playing, my crosstown rival, and yes, I can't wait. I'm excited to go out and show how good I can be in this moment. That's a challenge. The threat mindset is when I start to look at it and say, man, I don't know if I'm tough enough. I don't know if I'm fast enough. My touch is not as good as that guy. He's going to beat me on the outside. So instead of focusing on negative outcomes and consequences, what we really need to be thinking about is, what's my plan for success? What are my strategies for being successful in this moment? That's how we manage the big stress before a game. And that kind of ties into the last question from Memphis, which is, before a big game, how do I stay calm and be in the right mindset to play? I'm going to echo in some capacity the same kinds of things that I just talked about. It's not over exaggerating. It's not making the moment any bigger than it needs to be. But from a mental skills perspective, and let me just jump ahead here real quick. So from a mental skills perspective, we can do certain things to help manage ourselves in the moments before that game, right? So managing the stress, managing the pressure, and staying calm, as you allude to, Memphis. So here are some things that we can do. And working with a sports performance coach, a mental skills coach, sports psychologist in this capacity, it's about developing these skills in many ways. The first is using imagery. Imagery is imagining yourself being successful in that moment. So let's say you're coming across, if you're a defender and you know that one of the attackers is really one of the most gifted players in the league, and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by that, take some time, visualize that athlete's tendencies, and now see yourself being successful defending that attacker, taking away time and space, taking away lanes, anticipating passes, etc. If that individual might have a step or two on you, making some adjustments in terms of time and space. So you can see yourself doing that. And I would challenge you to engage all of your senses. See yourself doing it. Hear yourself in the moment. Feel yourself moving with some success. Hearing, your teammates supporting you and appreciating the success that you're having on the field. Those kinds of things. So that's a simple strategy. Another is respectfully setting some goals going into competition. And in particular, having some process goals that are set. So ultimately, what are the things that I need to do in order to be successful in this kind of moment? right? Maybe it's being assertive and it's attacking certain aspects of the game. Maybe it's communicating really well with your teammates. Maybe it's being quick on the first touch. So ultimately what we're saying here is set some goals that allow you to define what success looks like so you can work toward those successes. The next set of skills around energy management. And what this really is, a nice precursor to what we were just talking about, is creating some self-awareness. What am I feeling? What emotions? So for example, anxiety or stress, pressure. And then it's what can I do either by changing my thinking or by changing my actions to change how I'm feeling. So for example, here's a really simple strategy. Some of us, when we have a tendency to get really nervous or anxious, we start to get quiet, right? If our natural tendency, or when we're at our best, is to communicate and be loose and really engage with our teammates, sometimes we have a tendency under those pressure moments to get quiet and we go internal. So here's my challenge. If you notice yourself getting quiet and internal when the pressure goes up, that's a cue to force yourself to start communicating with your teammates, staying loose, engaging conversation, be a leader on the field, those kinds of things. Because now what you're doing is changing your behavior to change how you're feeling. And that feeling is going to influence the way you think. Now all of a sudden confidence goes up, and that's going to be a precursor to some successes, right? Does that make sense? The other thing is sometimes when we start to feel lots of pressure, our legs start to feel heavy, or we feel a little bit short of breath. Why does that happen? Well, one, we have an adrenaline dump that occurs. So there's a biological process that's happening, but also we start to shorten our breathing cycle. We become less diaphragmatic breathers, right? And we become really chest breathers instead of belly breathers. So what I would challenge you to do, if you start to feel really heavy, if you start to feel like your breath is short, do something that's explosive and high energy, that's loose, whether it's jumping rope or do a couple sprints on the sidelines, and then give yourself a little moment for your body to come back down to baseline. What you've just done is changed your biology in that moment. You're going to breathe deeper because physically now you require more oxygen. Your body, the cortisol that was released and the adrenaline that dumped earlier is now going to get washed because of the excitement that you just created. Okay, so we can manage our energy by changing our actions. So as some food for thought. The other piece is asking yourself, in terms of your motivation, why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I choosing to be here? Yeah, I want to be in this game. Okay. Why do I want to play in this game? Because I want to go out and demonstrate how my years of training have translated into me being a much better player. I want to be relied on as a great defender. Okay. And then also you might think about how you connect with your teammates and around relatedness. And you want to be a good teammate and a good support to each other. So if we focus on the fact that we're making a choice to play the game, that we're choosing to try to demonstrate to be the best version of ourselves, and we want to connect with our teammates, we can help manage a lot of the pressure just simply by connecting in those three ways. And then lastly, and certainly not least, which is coming back to what we started with, is if we change the way we think, we change the way we feel. If we change the way we feel, we change the way we act. Our self-talk is probably in theory, the simplest thing to change, but in practice, arguably one of the hardest things to change. So I ask you this question. How often are you supportive of your own process? So when you make a mistake, do you give yourself constructive feedback like you would like to receive it from a coach? Or do you berate yourself and judge yourself and give yourself a hard time and change your attitude to now I'm not good and coach is going to bench me, and your thinking goes to a whole different, another place? What I challenge you to do, again, is come back to this idea of non-judgmental thinking. What is working? What is not working? What would I continue to do? And what could I do differently? If I stay there, I'm in a good place. And then I ask you to add one thing, and that is do statements. Work with your coaches to figure out what are the things that you should be focusing on in a game to do, right? Whether it's being more aggressive, anticipating the defense, leading your teammates with a pass. Ask your coaches for do statements, actionables. And let's focus on the things that you need to do, not the things that you avoid. So coaches hear this as well, because this is an important one. Sometimes we'll give actionables, but they're more in the phrase of a don't statement, right? Don't fall back too quickly. So what's the alternative to that? Let's keep our back line hot, right? So the don't statement, whether we give a do statement or a don't statement, whatever the instruction is what we pay attention to, and that becomes more the actionable. So what we really need to do is stay focused in what the directive of what we want to accomplish, the ideal end result. So if the goal is to not allow our back line to fall back too quickly, so what we want to avoid is don't fall back quickly. Let's always give the instruction, get the back line up, be assertive with the back line, close the gap quickly, give do statements. So I challenge you as athletes, in your own narrative, if you really want to mitigate stress and pressure, and if you want to perform a little better under pressure, give yourself more things, actionables of what to do, and focus less on the things that you want to avoid. There's a really fun process in sports psychology called ironic processing. And the more we think about the things we don't want to do, the more likely we are to actually do them. So let's avoid that pitfall, right? Ask your mom and dad how many times they say, don't forget my keys. And what do? They forget their keys. So instead, what they should say is, I need to get my keys, put my keys in my pocket, or identify where they put their keys, not don't forget my keys. Make sense? So give yourself the do statements, not the don't statements. And that should help mitigate some of those challenges, some of the threats and pressures, et cetera. So I know we're a few minutes over time. So I'm gonna pause there to be respectful of everyone's time. But does anybody have thoughts, comments, questions that they would like to throw out here?
Dr. Mann, I wanted to share how I thought that how well connected, going through the presentation, how well connected not just the player is, but also the coach with the player and the parent, right? And what we're trying to do is give the players an avenue to use everyone as a resource, so that we can go into the situation of preparedness, less anxiety, less stress, by being able to do the things that we talk about, or one of the best things I've ever heard as a coach. I mean, this is just as good for coaches as well. One of the best things I've ever heard, or one of the best questions I was ever asked right before a game was, are you expecting to win or are you hoping to win? And it kind of stuck with me. And really, if I'm hoping to win, is I'm trying to get by. I'm playing in a very good opponent, and maybe my week of preparedness wasn't as good, right? And that can relate to a player as well.
Yes.
And I think players, especially young players, often we talk about confidence. I looked at the questions that Micah, Memphis, and Anel had. I encourage every player that's on this call, utilize us as a resource. If you feel like your touch on a Thursday was off, or maybe your finishing was off on a Thursday, take the extra 10, 15 minutes, ask your coach to have a couple balls out in the field and just finish on target. Get your confidence levels up, because that is a massive tool to go into the game. And it does alleviate the stress. It does alleviate the anxiety of going in. So I just wanted to kind of share that to let everyone know that use us as much as a resource as you can, because this is what we are truly here for.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great message. And if I can extend on that just a little bit, I think, as you alluded to the idea of expectation, so hope versus expect. I think, when we prepare, to your point, when we have that good week of preparation, our expectations shift, right? We should have the expectation that we're going to perform well. But I will challenge all of our athletes, including our coaches as well, is, in the back of our mind, we have that expectation, but let's always come back to our controllables in the moment, right? We can never ultimately control truly the outcome of a game. We can only control our effort, our attitude, and in other words, what we think, what we say, and what we do. If we control those three things, and we do that to the best of our ability, what we think, what we say, and what we do, then ultimately we can realize that expectation. But if our focus is on the result or the expected outcome, that in and of itself can be a distraction. So I think your point is a brilliant point, because when we have the expectation and we feel like we are well prepared, we're more likely to actually stay in the moment. It's when we have an expectation of a good result, lacking some confidence, we get overwhelmed by it, and then our attention spreads. So it's a brilliant point. So thank you for sharing that. Well, if we don't have any other thoughts or comments, the last thing I would just like to say is thank you for everybody's time. Again, especially on a Friday night, running a little bit over time. I appreciate that patience. Hopefully there was some tangibles that you can all take away from this. But for nothing else, what an opportunity for me to be able to share with you all. So thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mann, and I'll wrap it up on our side. And again, just on behalf of the club and behalf of the players who all attended tonight, thank you for your time and obviously your insight as well. I think one thing that I reflect back on my career, and I know Tommy, Danny, and a couple of other coaches on the call, I definitely wish I had this when I was growing up through the academies, and having this, obviously we look at not only the technical, the tactical and the physical, but the recognizing the mental and the psychological components around performance is extremely important as well. So I would definitely encourage any of the boys, even if you stayed on tonight, we will be posting this on our YouTube channel. So if there's anything that you missed or you want to go back and revisit, please go back and watch it again and take some notes. Again, some fantastic resource, and Dr. Mann, we hope to have you on again sometime very soon.
I would love that. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, guys, those down in Tampa, I hope you had a good, safe journey. For those heading down tomorrow, safe journey. MLS 2, good luck against Plantation and on Saturday, and Boca on Sunday. Other than that, good night, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Appreciate you, Burns.
Thank you all.